Okay, so let's dive right into this article you sent over. It's October 7th, 2024, a year to the day since the Hamas attack on Israel. And we're weeks away from a U.S. election. The war in Gaza is still going on. This article about how President Biden and other U.S. political figures were handling this anniversary, well, it's complicated, to say the least.
It really is. You've got the weight of the anniversary itself, the reality of the ongoing conflict, and then the election season adding a whole other layer of, well, everything to it. This article really captures all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like Biden lighting that memorial candle at the White House, that's a powerful image, right? Yeah. But then he calls President Herzog afterward to offer condolences, but not Netanyahu. There's been tension between them, sure, but skipping that call on this specific day feels deliberate. What do you think?
It's definitely noteworthy. It's not just about a phone call, right? It highlights a real concern within the Biden administration about how Netanyahu is handling the war, particularly his stance on Gaza's future.
Which the article points out pretty clearly. Biden supports a plan where a reformed Palestinian Authority takes control of Gaza, but Netanyahu is completely against it.
Exactly. And that difference in viewpoint is a major obstacle to any kind of lasting peace agreement.
And it's not just those two either. The article mentions that even countries that are generally sympathetic to Israel are hesitant to help rebuild Gaza unless Israel commits to a two-state solution, which, again, Netanyahu opposes. So what does that even mean for trying to move forward? It feels like we're right back where we started, but with even more at stake.
It's incredibly complex. What's interesting is the article highlights how this is no longer just an Israeli-Palestinian issue. The entire international community is invested in finding some resolution, especially those countries that see a two-state solution as the only way forward. But with Netanyahu taking such a hardline stance, it's causing tension far beyond the region.
And those tensions are definitely being felt here in the U.S., especially with the election so close.
Yeah.
It's not just foreign policy anymore. It's become a major domestic political issue, too.
Right, exactly. And the article dives into that really well. Yeah, and it really highlights how unavoidable that is right now. I mean, the timing of this anniversary, right in the thick of an election, it's bound to get pulled into the political arena.
All And we see that playing out with all these other figures mentioned in the article, too. Kamala Harris visiting a synagogue, Tim Walz talking about Minnesota's Jewish community. It's all kind of intertwined. But one quote really stuck with me. JD Vance at that National Mall Memorial said the only way this war truly ends is if Hamas releases the hostages, which is a pretty strong statement to make. Do you think that lines up with the current administration's stance?
You know, it's interesting you bring that up because it actually reveals a point of unusual agreement between the two sides. Vance's comment, even though he made it while campaigning, basically reflects what the Biden administration has been saying, too. So you've got both sides of the aisle, as different as they are on so many things, agreeing on this one condition for peace.
Wow, yeah. Don't see that every day in this political climate. It's almost like they found common ground in the most unexpected place. But then you have Trump visiting Rabbi Schneerson's grave, planning meetings with Jewish leaders. And given his, shall we say, complicated history when it comes to talking about Jewish people, you can't help but wonder what's motivating these very public gestures.
It's definitely something to consider. The timing is interesting, right? With the election so close, it's hard not to see these actions as an attempt to win over Jewish voters. But then it also makes you question the sincerity of it all, you know? Is this genuine outreach or is it just a calculated political move? It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's for certain, this anniversary happening right as the election heats up. It's putting every move these politicians make under a microscope.
That's a really good point. It's like everyone's watching their every move, every word, trying to figure out what they really stand for. The stakes are just so high right now. It's easy to get caught up in all the political drama, but we can't forget about the human cost of this conflict. You know, the article makes a point of highlighting the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the families that are still grieving, the hostages that are still being held. It's a sobering reminder of what's at stake here.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that beyond the politics and the diplomacy and all that, there are real people whose lives have been irrevocably changed by this conflict. The article does a good job bringing that back into focus.
It does. And it makes you think about another thing the article brought up, that quote from Trump about Gaza's potential, how developers could come in and make it better than Monaco.
Yeah.
It's like, on the one hand, it's kind of an optimistic outlook, but on the other hand, given the devastation, the political climate, it almost feels out of touch with reality. So is rebuilding even possible at this point? I mean, can you really rebuild something like that without some major changes, both within the region and globally?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there are no easy answers. Rebuilding Gaza
Right.
physically and socially, it's going to take a massive effort from everyone involved. And it's not just about rebuilding infrastructure, right? It's about rebuilding trust, fostering reconciliation, addressing the root causes of the conflict.
It's a monumental task, and I think we've only just scratched the surface of this incredibly complex issue. But hopefully this deep dive has given you, our listeners, something to think about. We've talked about the commemorations, the political maneuvering, the human cost. And as we mark this somber anniversary, the question remains, what happens next? What will the next year bring? Thanks for joining us for this really important conversation.